Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Today, it is the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia, by the way, not only the over-under win total of 10.5 at FanDuel, they are the preseason favorites at FanDuel at plus 300 to win the national championship. So we're going to go ahead and talk Georgia in a second. Before we get to it, make sure that you are subscribed to the College Football Betting Podcast feed, Apple, Spotify. If you want to leave a 5-star review, we would appreciate your support. We are pumping out content nonstop. Also, we do have the separate college football podcast, college football betting YouTube feed. If you search college football betting with Aaron Torres, you will find us there. We're trying to ramp up that page. We are closing in on 1,000 subscribers there. By the way, we're at 42,000 for the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube. So we very much appreciate your support, but make sure to subscribe. We'll be pumping out all sorts of these preview pieces and preview content as we get ready for the season ahead. So as I said, we did just a few days ago, the Alabama Crimson Tide. Today, it is time to look at the Georgia Bulldogs. As I said, they are the national championship favorites at FanDuel Sportsbook, but the focus is on the over-under win total. It is 10.5, according to FanDuel, coming in on the over of 10.5. Let's go ahead and dive in. In terms of last year, I think everybody kind of remembers the deal. Georgia, coming off 2 national championships, was awesome last season, okay? And so season plays out. Not only do they not lose in the regular season, most of the games aren't even competitive. Like, you go back and look, 12-0 in the regular season. How about this? The only games that were decided by a score or less, a 7-point road win at Auburn. You heard Kirby Smart say that's one of the toughest places in America to play at SEC Media Days. And then to end the regular season, an 8-point win at Georgia Tech. So it shows you, they played at Tennessee. They played Ole Miss at home. They played Kentucky at home. None of those games were even competitive for the most part. By the way, Missouri, a 9-point win. So they dominated college football. But then, of course, we know what happened in the SEC championship game. They lose to Alabama, go to the Orange Bowl, destroy that depleted Florida State team 63-3. And before we even get into anything, I think that's just kind of an interesting note, is that last year, if we had the 12-team college football playoff, you know what's wild? Georgia probably would have ended up with the 5 or the 6 seed. And you know what would have happened? They probably would have been the favorite going in to the college football playoff. So it's interesting to just reset our brains. A year ago, you could argue that Georgia was the best team in college football, didn't even get a chance. Now you can get in as the 2nd or 3rd best team in the SEC, and you're going to have as good of a chance as anybody to win it. Now, in terms of the offseason, it was actually a pretty quiet offseason. Coaching staff, unlike Alabama, unlike Michigan, unlike a lot of other places, largely stayed intact. A couple nice additions to the coaching staff, but nothing major. And no real, surprising or major losses. You lose Brock Bowers, obviously a top 10 or so pick to the Las Vegas Raiders. You lose a couple players out of the defensive backfield. But the big piece that is coming back, Carson Beck, I don't know how seriously he actually considered going pro, but he's coming back, and he, as much as anybody, is the reason that Georgia's the favorite. And so as we look ahead into the season, I just think Carson Beck is such a fascinating place to start, right? Because we think of Georgia, and we think of the fact that we just think of these teams that have these great offenses, and Texas and Ole Miss and this team and that team. You understand that Georgia statistically was the best offense in the SEC last year. And I know Texas wasn't playing in it, but they were a top 5 offense nationally, better stats than Ole Miss, better stats than Texas. It shows you how good Carson Beck was. Did anybody have just look at these stats. 3,900 yards passing, 24 touchdowns, 72% completion percentage. So this guy was awesome. He's incredible. Georgia's the national championship favorite. He is the preseason Heisman favorite in most sports books. It shows you how good this offense was, and I think people underappreciate it. At running back, Big piece there that is coming in. Trevor Etienne, the transfer from Florida, was really good at Florida a year ago. Now, we know he recently got in some trouble off the field, did get arrested. No word on if anything will happen there in terms of punishment. Obviously, Kirby Smart did say at SEC Media Days, we now fine players through our collective if they get in trouble, but no word if he's going to miss any time. But he comes in 753 yards rushing, 8 TDs for a bad Florida team. He'll be running behind the best offensive line he's ever run behind, so it could be a big year for him. And then I also think it's worth noting, I just mentioned that Georgia probably doesn't get the credit that they deserve for how good the offense was last year. Let me take it a step further. We talk about Ohio State and Texas and whoever in terms of wide receiver depth. I think you could argue Georgia has the deepest wide receiver room in college football this year. Here is who is part of Georgia's wide receiver room this season. You have Dominic Lovett back, 54 catches, 613 yards, 4 touchdowns a year ago. Ra Thomas, 23 catches, 383 yards, 1 touchdown a year ago. Arian Smith, 8 catches, 153 yards, 2 touchdowns a season ago. Oscar Delpit, tight end, 24 catches, 284 yards, 3 touchdowns. But then, this is who you also added in the portal in the offseason. Colby Young from Miami, 47 catches, 563 yards, 5 touchdowns. London Humphreys from Vandy, 22 catches, 439 yards, 4 touchdowns. Michael Jackson from USC, 17 catches, 1 TD. And then Benjamin Urasek, a tight end from Stanford, who had 16 catches, 239 yards. I feel like Ace Ventura. I'm out of breath here. But the point I'm trying to make, that is a ton of talent. And Carson Beck will have no shortage of talent to throw to, no shortage of depth. And as I mentioned a minute ago, 4 starters back on this offensive line. They are deep, they are big, they are physical, and they are experienced. Then you get to the defense. And again, we think of Georgia as a defensive run-based team. Carson Beck probably doesn't get the credit he deserves. This defense was obviously, again, awesome last year. Top 10 nationally in total defense, top 10 nationally in scoring defense. And what's interesting, a lot of these schools lost a lot of talent from the front 7, from the this, from the that. Georgia brings back most of its key pieces. Mykel Williams, I know it's kind of a thing where, he might be playing a little bit more linebacker as opposed to the true edge, but he comes back 6.5 TFLs, 4.5 sacks a year ago. Nazir Stackhouse, that big man in the middle at nose guard, 24 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Christian Miller's back, Warren Brinson's back. And then the linebackers. Like, you talk about a talented group of dudes at linebacker. Smile Munden. I know, like Trevor Etienne, he did get in some trouble the last few weeks, but he's back, multi-year starter, 68 tackles a year ago. CJ Allen. Remember, Jamon DeMaz Johnson left this program to go to Kentucky. But it was because CJ Allen kind of stepped in and took all of his reps a year ago as a true freshman. 45 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss. Chaz Chambliss, back at linebacker as well. As I said earlier, I think I mentioned this. If there's anything resembling a little bit of a weakness for Georgia, probably the secondary, where you do lose Tyke Smith, Kamari Lassiter, Javon Bullard. But man, oh man, when you recruit like Georgia, you're going to be just fine there going forward. Malachi Starks is the veteran that is back there. KJ Bolden, of course, the 5-star who flipped from Florida State right before signing day. And also worth noting, Dalen Everett's played a bunch of starts and a ton of experience there. So I don't want to say I'm not worried when you're going to be playing at Tennessee, when you're going to be playing an Ole Miss, but I don't know that I'm as worried about Georgia's second. Like, we're kind of picking at nits here, or whatever they say, nitpicking. I know some people say picking at nits, but not really that worried because they are going to be so talented. Now, where it gets interesting, I'll say this, because the over-under is 10.5. It's the schedule. And the one thing I will say, I think we talk about all these different schools with all these different schedules, Texas, Oklahoma, Alabama with a tough schedule. Georgia's schedule, you could argue that Georgia, outside of probably Florida, is as hurt by losing divisions as anybody in the SEC, at least for this coming season, okay? So think about it. You had Vandy. You had South Carolina on the schedule. Those are probably would have been the 2 worst teams in the old SEC East. They're both off the schedule. Now you add at Texas, you add at Ole Miss, and this schedule is just bonkers. One, you open against Clemson on a neutral. Now, you're already listed as a double-digit favorite going into that game. Think to me that probably speaks a little bit more about how much Clemson has fallen than anything else. That's not a criticism of Georgia. It's just Clemson should not be an underdog by double digits to anybody, but that program's kind of going in the wrong direction. But then you get into September at Kentucky week 3. I know that's a cakewalk. Kentucky always keeps it close and competitive at Kroger Field. I mean, the last time that you played there, final score was 16-6. So I'm not saying you're going to lose to Kentucky. That's just historically been a place that Georgia, has not dominated. That'll be a night game in front of a sold-out crowd. Then you get a bye. Then guess what happens? That's when it gets interesting. You go to Bama the final weekend of September. So an incredible game. Kalen DeBoer, year one, obviously with Georgia having played Clemson and Kentucky. Alabama will have played Wisconsin to that point. We'll have a pretty good feel for both those teams by then. But worth noting, again, at Alabama before the end of September. They do get a bye before that. But then after that, it starts to get pretty tough, okay? You have Auburn a week later. Listen, you're going to be a comfortable favorite. But you hit mid-October. You have to go to Texas. That's going to be a crazy weekend. The F1 race is also in Austin the same weekend, so it's going to be insane down there. But Texas is insanely talented. So if I just left it there, at Alabama, at Texas, before the third weekend of October, that is insane. You get a bye out of that. And then here is how the home stretch finishes. Florida on a neutral. Okay, that's one you should win. Not a problem. I don't trust in Billy Napier's team. Then at Ole Miss and Tennessee at home in late October, early November. So your final for your 4 games after the midway point, at Texas, Florida, at Ole Miss, Tennessee, plus at Alabama, plus Clemson on a neutral. And so when I look at the over-under win total, listen, I'm going to take the over of 10.5. But this is one where if I'm at a sports book, if I'm in Vegas or if I'm at the local sports book or pulling up my app on the phone, it might be a 1-unit play. I just don't think you can feel comfortable pushing all the chips in the middle, Georgia going undefeated, Georgia going 11-1, because the schedule is tougher. At Ole Miss is a really good team. At Texas is a really good team. At Alabama, that is it. Those 3 teams. So when we're recording right now, the first AP poll has not come out yet, but those are 3 teams that will be in the top 10 to start the season. And so the idea, you have to play all 3 of them on the road, plus the games at home, Tennessee, Auburn, Florida on a neutral, Clemson on a neutral. It is not easy. So ultimately, again, I think for the over-under win total, it's a stay away. But I do think that Georgia is justified as a national champion. And that's what makes, and I know I said it earlier, that's what makes this college football playoff era so cool. You're not going to be judged by one game, one day, one moment in time. And maybe it'll take a little bit away from the regular season. That remains to be seen. But at the same time, if this was a year ago, Georgia would have gotten in as the 5 or 6 seed and probably would have been the favorite to win the national championship. So Georgia's going to get into the playoff. I love them at plus 300. I believe they are justified as the preseason national championship favorite. But as far as the over-under win total, stay away to me. I would lean the over. But again, at Alabama, at Texas, at Ole Miss, probably smarter to stay away as far as I'm concerned.